Nope, no buzz. Just Bees Book Club. Um, Buckle up. Today's book, the longest I've spent reading a book in quite some time, is going to be S, conceived by JJ Abrams and written by Doug Dorst. Conceived seems here to mostly mean like he was the executive producer type, as in he probably provided some money. He definitely did the old, oh man, I have such a good idea for a book. Would you write it for me? Move. S. This is the slipcover for it. This is the only indication that you have that it's by Abrams and Dorst. I have looked up Doug Dorst and I'm not familiar with anything else he's ever written, and frankly, some of the interviews I was reading did not make me interested in learning that much more. Yeah. I could read the back, but I haven't, so I don't. It doesn't seem particularly relevant. Inside that slipcover is a book called Ship of Theseus by VM Straka. There is, on the front page, it says book for loan. It's from a high school. There's the back page has the. I've already dropped something out of this fucking book, of course. Uh, Sorry, my bad. I didn't mean to drop the Etvos wheel. Point I was making though, we've got this here. You can't really see it, but the title page, Ship of Theseus by VM Straka. Winged Shoes Press, New York, 1949. This S came out in 2013. There's a whole list of other books by VM Straka. It's got the copyright page. Copyright 1949 by VM Straka and FX Caldera. First edition, October 1949. Other things you might notice if you're looking at this is the formatting of this book. The actual text of the novel is sort of very small in the middle of these very large pages, and they are filled with margin notes. And they're not just filled with margin notes, they're filled with, well, marginalia. See, I can't hold this book up without things falling out of it. Like page 113 here, we've got a little postcard. Greetings from Brazil. There's a whole message on the back, etc., etc. This ranges all the way to, let's see if I can't find it, the one that was my least favorite thing to have to deal with while trying to read this book. Ah, yes, page 306. We have this. A fucking coffee place napkin with a whole map of Pronghorn State University, which is where the characters who are writing the margins are. See, they are sort of the second layer of the narrative of this book. But let's back up a little bit. Ship of Theseus, for those who don't know, is a classical sort of thought experiment wherein the question of if all of the parts of a thing are replaced, I was going to put it back in the slipcover, but I'm just going to leave it out in case I need to do it. If all the parts of the thing are replaced, is it the same thing? It's sort of the question of identity is central to the concept of the Ship of Theseus. This book, in the sort of first level narrative, that is the VM Straka written Ship of Theseus novel, is his, well, okay. His novel is about a man named S who sort of comes to with a wet overcoat in a strange city, and he's wandering around completely amnesiac. He gets sort of shanghaied onto this weird boat. Shanghaied is specifically the term they use there. I've never been entirely sure if that was a racist term or not, and I remember hearing discussions about it, but it probably is. He becomes part of a crew. There's these strange dudes who have their mouths sewn shut. Not all dudes. On this boat, there's incidences of time seeming to pass at different variable rates as he's on the boat versus on land. He sort of gets brought into this global concern that involves this is like, I guess, sort of spoilers already, but like I won't give away the whole thing, but just to sort of set up the novel itself. Yes, we have S, who's amnesiac, sort of searching for his own identity. There's a woman named Sola, who he sees right before he gets taken onto the boat, who he thinks might know something about him. So he's sort of searching for her and for himself in certain ways. He ends up meeting up with people who are engaged in sort of subversive or revolutionary activities against this man named Vovoda, who is an arms manufacturer that has some new super weapon, basically. It follows his sort of adventures as he searches for himself and for love and for justice, I guess, just speaking very broadly here. Um, the second layer narrative is that these two young adults have been passing this book back and forth to each other. Initially in the library, there's Jen, who works in the library, who found this book and is like reading it. She writes it's initially in like a blue cursive font. And then there's Eric, who is a graduate student who was just expunged from the record of the school, Pronghorn State University, whose book it is. He's had it forever. There's like pencil markings from when he was 16, and he's responding in, I believe, black ink initially, in sort of block letters. Yeah. Um, so in the literal margins of this book about a man sort of finding his own identity and searching for this woman named Sola to hopefully help him get to it, there is a story of a graduate student hitting on an undergrad. To back this up, don't hate this book. There were things I deeply enjoyed about it. I am going to be very dismissive in many ways of it, but I will sort of get to my own thing in a second here. The margin notes then take on, as the book progresses, you get different not fonts, different pens basically. There's like bits where Jen has switched from the blue that she initially uses to like a purple. I think she's red at one point. There's orange of her. There's green for Eric. There is that seems to be one of the like timelines, and then I think it's or not timelines, but like times they have passed this book back and forth. Yeah, and then she has a purple, um, and he has another black, I think. A red. He has a red, and then there's a final sort of passing back and forth of the book where they're both in black. So you sort of can piece together how their research into who VM Straka is going, because that's the initial sort of mystery that they are solving together. VM Straka in this universe is a very, very, very famous author from sort of the turn of last century. Like this said, it's published. This book is allegedly published in '49. It's his final book. He was supposed to be this like this this like very well lauded but very unknown author from the like working from like the 20s to the 50 to just about 1950, something like that, maybe a little longer. I followed most of these mysteries, but they didn't intrigue me, and I didn't fall into any holes where I was like, I need to memorize every date and name in this thing, and learn all of the ways that they translate into birds and how those birds map to coordinates on this Etvus wheel, that etc., etc. This is the kind of book that this is, though. That is the thing. Like, if you Google it, the first things you find are obviously the Wikipedia page and fucking Goodreads or whatever, and I'm Amazon, obviously, but like, if you dig even a tiny bit deeper, you immediately start finding blogs that are dedicated to, solving the mystery, seeing what all is there, theorizing, etc., etc. Like, the old House of Leaves forums. I think that sort of mostly covers the plot stuff, which, okay, it's only 10 minutes. Like I said, buckle up. Um, okay, to get back to sort of it's like a decent transition into my own sort of feelings about this book, S. these kinds of things, for as like apparently dense as they are, or like sort of like formally experimental, um, these are like candy to me in a certain way, and I think a lot of this comes back to the fact that I read House of Leaves when I was a senior in high school. I liked to say that it is. I read it over my prom weekend because I didn't go to prom. I just, sat there with House of Leaves, and over the course of 2.5 days, just devoured the whole thing. It's a deeply formative book for me in that way. It's like the thing I go to if people ask like, "What's your favorite book?" Because you need to have like a kind of dismissive answer to that because it's too difficult. Same way that Final Fantasy VII is my favorite game, etc., etc. Um, Never really did that with an album, I don't think. I don't know. So this like, multi-level narrative that formally experiments with what it means to be a book is a thing that like I just kind of chew up. Last year the closest thing I got to it was this book called Rabbits by Terry Miles, which should be in my big I'm writing a blog post about everything I read last year, and there's a decent little paragraph about it in there. I didn't think that book was very good. That one doesn't do so much formal experimenting, although it was initially a podcast, I think. So it turns from a podcast into a novel about this, you know, globe and maybe even universe spanning basically alternate reality game and the implications that getting involved with it have. It was like it was like candy to me. I didn't think it was bad. I didn't think it was good. It was just like I need this part of my brain to fire off sometimes, and it's nice when it does. This that is roughly how I feel about Ship of Theseus. I Every once in a while there's a part of my brain that I like to feed, and it's not necessary or even useful in many cases, but it is just kind of a, a thing that I find nice to do for me. Um, hmm, I'm kind of blowing through things here, or at least I feel like I am. I guess, yeah. I could have said that much in a much longer time. So okay, maybe this won't be an hour and a half long. Okay. Do I want to talk next about sort of what I encountered after reading the book, or I think I will start with just there's a thing that I've heard recently, and I've said this to basically everyone I've talked to about this book. I don't know. I think I might have been on like a podcast, like an actual play thing, maybe like a side thing for friends at the table. But like, I think there's like a sort of truism, at least in my mind, there is a sort of truism that like if you're a comedic or if you're a comedian and and you have a role like in a film, um, sort of the golden rule should probably be you shouldn't play someone funnier than you, right? Because you can't do that. Um, it's not entirely true. Like there are workarounds there, but I think that's like I might have been in the case of a podcast. Like you don't, if you are not somebody who's like super quippy, don't make your whole character's thing be about making great quips because you're not going to do it. Um, so as a corollary to that, a truism, at least, even if it's just a truism for me personally, um, it's kind of a heavy lift, right? To decide you are going to write a seminal novel, like a seminal left wing political novel that is also this beloved love story of, I guess, mid centuries. It's 1949, so it's mid centuries, but like you're playing right in the like I guess in the sort of lull between high modernism and postmodernism. Um, but like the Doug Dorst just don't. just doesn't write like that. Like he just doesn't have it. And like it wouldn't bother me, except the whole premise is that this is like this incredibly important piece of literature that people have been studying for a generation or two generations, who where people just can't decode the messages in here, and they can't, even agree about the like central thematic issues and the big meanings, and um the influences and all that. The the text of the book Ship of Theseus is like a really competently written, like, thriller with some dream sequences thrown in there. Like it is, I am omnivorous, I think, as this channel has begun to show up. Even though it's only been like 7 videos or whatever, I will read most things. I have, I have an undergraduate degree in English literature. I have no pretensions toward literary fiction. I think in many ways it is a genre in all functional senses. I mean I adore Proust also. Like I In Search of Lost Time is one of my favorite things I've ever read. It is a book that, like, not just taught me that you can find this rhythm of a sentence, so that the sentence can pause and like take off in so many different ways, that the sentence itself goes for like 3 pages, and it's beautiful at every moment of it, even when it's like frustrating, and the artifice is there. It's a book that made me, if only briefly, fall deeply in love with flowers and paintings that don't even really exist. It's And flowers which I like have no sense of smell. I am My brain doesn't process visual beauty in certain ways that I think a lot of other people do. And just reading the way he would phrase things took me to a different aesthetic experience than I could access on my own. Um, I feel like I have experienced that in a number of different people. I think Greg Bear has had a similar effect on me, in like a very different way, different to how his writing is. I mean, he's obviously not writing. Greg Bear is a sort of, he was like almost a cyberpunk writer. He's a hard sci-fi writer who's been working for a very long time. He wrote a couple of Halo novels. Like he's kind of that level of guy. Like he's not like well known, I don't think, but like if you know hard science fiction, you've probably heard of a few of his books. This is not this is not a classic. It's not a mid-century classic. The writing is rarely clunky, but it's so often completely inane. Um, I didn't like um, I didn't pull any lines out or take any notes or anything, but I flip to a random page, and I will. Yeah, there's nothing in this specific paragraph that is spoilers unless you already know what is going on. So, okay, here's just again a paragraph I flipped to randomly and just slightly vetted. It will not. Today will be another day of his walking among the mute and alienated, every step reminding him that he is as ghostly and indistinct to them as they are to him. They may share a destination, the newspaper bin, but they will return to their sad, quiet domiciles and read of distant events that they have no power to change. That is a very workmanlike paragraph. That is the most um, mundane way to describe a very specific, almost magical realist space that this character has found himself in. There is nothing. There's nothing effervescent here, is almost what I want to say. But like, today will be another day of his walking among the mute and alienated. There's This is gonna sound pretentious as shit, but there's no poetry in in this book. Like, it is it is again I really enjoyed it in many, many ways. I found it very enjoyable throughout, um, despite being deeply frustrated. Um, because yes, because, and again, this is not a thing I am trying to say is a necessary precondition to a book being good. Do you know? Does that make sense? I try not to say shit like that when I know I'm not actually talking to somebody because that's weird. Um, but like, yes, again, I don't think a high literary style, the sort of thing that might be, candy to a graduate professor or even a graduate student, um, is a precondition to something being good or successful at what it does. I do think if your premise is that you are writing one of those books and you don't have the prose style to do that, then you're going to at the very least frustrate me slightly. There was a thing that happened that when I fell into this, I finished this book a couple yesterday, and then today I fell into some holes here and there, and I found out that one of the sort of premises that you learn about in the foreword to this book, because the foreword is by the false translator, FX Caldera, another person who was made up, who's a sort of central figure throughout the text. She has a bunch of footnotes in the text that are often being figured out by Eric and Jen as they will like try to figure out if there's a cipher in there, and they will get hidden messages and stuff like that. It is told it is mentioned in the foreword that the last like handful of pages of chapter or some number of pages from chapter 10 were lost when Straka died. And she knows Straka died because he had invited her to meet for the first time ever in their like 20 or 30 years or whatever of work together of her translating his novels. And then she gets there and he's gone. There's a scuffle. There's et cetera, et cetera. So there's some pages missing in chapter 10. Um, Apparently, about a year after this book came out, Doug Dorst tweeted something that was like, "Oh wow, VM Straka's these are allegedly VM Straka's like this is the ending that was written by Straka rather than or the parts that were missing from chapter 10 written by Straka rather than Caldera." They are like everything else in this book. They are the work that they're trying to do is very interesting. Unlike actually a lot of this book, that bit was just badly written. Just rough. um, I would recommend seeking them out if you finish this book and feel like you might want to engage in a little Schadenfreude. Because I think if you read Ship of Theseus, I think you can, you know, engage in a little Schadenfreude. It seems fine to me. Speaking, I think I finished my point there. Speaking of people who read Ship of Theseus, that hole that I fell down into, um, one of the things that I think was made very clear to me by reading a couple of sort of theory blogs about this, and again, I read House of Leaves. I here's a particular thing. When I turned 21, I was in college. I believe I was in my sophomore year of college. Um, I think that makes sense. Or was I senior? I must have been a senior. I would have been in my senior year of college, I think. Um, Whichever it was, it doesn't matter. I was in college and I didn't really. Again, this is I read House of Leaves in my senior year of high school, so this is years later. I must have been sort of revisiting the book. I don't think I ever I don't think I've ever once reread it in its entirety or anything like that, which is interesting. Um, but On my 21st birthday, I remember this very specifically because 21, is supposed to be a remarkable one, right? It's a big event. Um, I did nothing. I did absolutely nothing. I didn't see anyone. I didn't um, do anything for me. I simply, did homework or whatever, or smoked weed probably. Um, and I remember this because I think I think this must have been when a bunch of my family members were having a hard time. I think maybe there was one or two handfuls, maybe more, not one or two, maybe handfuls, one or two messages that I ended up getting also. But I remember my 21st birthday, the only like birthday message I got was from the House of Leaves forums because I was back on the House of Leaves forums. I was reading them, and it was an automated one, and I was just like, "This is perfect. This is hilarious. I'm never going to forget this. This is 21 for me." Having already been to a number of friends' 21st, doing the bar crawl, etc., etc. Um, I simply received a message from the House of Leaves automated, House of Leaves forum automated, message, automated emailer saying, "Hey, happy birthday," and I was like, "Yeah, you you you've been around, you've been with me this whole time, House of Leaves." And I'm glad it wasn't, from anyone specific in that, because it felt much more like a relationship I had with a text rather than an author. Um, but when you fall into the House of Leaves, sort of, interpretation, fan theory shit, I can't call out what it is now, and I don't barely remember what it was then. But I know what it wasn't, although it had some of this, was what I was able to find of the Ship of Theseus sort of fan reconstruction thing, which basically boils down to Joseph Campbell. It's a lot of Joseph Campbell on those forums, on those blogs. A lot of people being like, "Wow, whoa, have you read Hero with a Thousand Faces? Yo, the mythic journey, whatever the fuck it's called. That's some good shit. I think it kind of maps here." I've never read Hero with a Thousand Faces. I have learned from that deep dive that JJ Abrams has employed Joseph Campbell very specifically, especially apparently with Lost. My impression of Joseph Campbell's work is that it is the most inane, um, like chauvinistic structuralist drivel. And again, maybe it's a lot more complicated than my understanding. But it seems to me, everything I've heard of it, every way I've seen it used, is that Joseph Campbell's sense of how all stories are one story and they are all, a Greek myth, basically, is the most capital W West bullshit of all time. And the way that they flatten out all stories, not into, I mean, whatever. This is the structuralist move, I guess. I don't fucking know. I don't know his, background. I don't know what he associated with. Um, I do know that to me is a structuralism, is saying what is common across all of these things. Let us have a structure here. And I know for me, especially after I read House of Leaves, I was really interested in Derrida. It's like, this Derrida guy comes up and he sounds really interesting. This post-structuralism stuff, this way that language is not a web of sign. It's not simply that there is a sign that is composed of a signifier and a signified. This pure Saussurean shit. This is language I would learn in undergrad. But that a word the signified is the absence, or is a structural absence, that words are fundamentally all connected to each other, and what they mean is not these other things. That to me sounds way more interesting than saying, well, if we look at 100 stories or 1,000 stories even, what what dainty little threads can we pull out? and then use as, I don't know, let's say an excuse to claim our culture is superior and that cultural relativism is false. This is, to me, and again, I've never read him, what Joseph Campbell sort of represents. And this, I think, hits at a truth about this book, Ship of Theseus. I think, again, I'm no I'm no critic, frankly. I have not done that in quite some time. I've written reviews in my time. I've done some freelancing. I've got an undergraduate degree. That none of this is a life. None of this makes a life. And frankly, you could argue that the absolute failure of my freelancing career, my having to move away from that entirely almost, indicates that maybe I am, in fact, a bad critic. That I am incapable of conveying the things that I want to in a way that engages an audience that is bigger than, say, Strange Horizons, which, hey, Strange Horizons is the best place for speculative fiction. They publish the most thoughtful reviews, I think, in the field. Their stories are often great, and they even regularly do science fiction poetry, which is a thing I don't care about at all, but think it's cool. I think it's cool that they do that. Strange Rise is incredible. Not the biggest name in the world, biggest house that I've ever been sort of regular at. I guess I was at the New Inquiry for a while. Not at, but like freelancing, but that was complicated. Okay, I'm glad I said buckle up because yes, okay, half an hour. Okay, still not as long as the Grievers, um, and not as accurate either. I don't think. I think the reason the fans. So this can go two ways, right? My suspicion is if I went back to the House of Leaves forum, I would find a lot of Joseph Campbell in there as well. But that text is explicit about its sort of theory background. Again, I'm 99% sure the first time I ever heard or read the name Derrida was inside of House of Leaves. I believe it's in the Johnny Truant footnote stuff narrative. I think he explicitly comes up. It's been well over a decade, I think, at this point since I read that book. Maybe not. Yeah, it would have been like 2006. Yeah, a decade and a half, I guess, at this point. So there's a thing about fans that fans of things, especially that like want to uncover the truth of a book, will lean in certain directions that are sort of culturally determined in many ways. And I suspect Joseph Campbell is always sort of in that mix. And entirely possible. I spent less than a day. I've spent a bunch of time today playing Ocarina of Time and napping. Like that's apparently the only thing I can do on my days off these days. And so maybe maybe this argument would blow up in a certain way if I spent any more time just reading sort of Ship of Theseus fan interpretation. And I will say also that like it's kind of cool that when you Google, like the thing I didn't say is when you Google it, you find a fucking Wikia page. You find people's blogs, and I think that actually rules. I really appreciate the lack of the wikification happening in that fandom. Like that is probably more important than everything else I've just said, which is like, yeah, fan wikis are a scourge. They are the worst thing. I am all over strategy wiki for Ocarina of Time also, but whatever. Um, just because a thing is terrible doesn't mean it's not a thing that doesn't, ethical, whatever. I think this book is not much smarter than Joseph Campbell. Is what I'm going to say. And I think, one gets the impression, at least I did, um, that Dorst is probably pretty explicitly pulling from Campbell's Hero of the Thousand Faces, even having not read it, just sort of knowing the broad structure of the hero's journey, and the ways that this does and does not conform to it. but also the ways that Campbell is sort of a the myth maker, the structuralist myth maker of Western storytelling. You know, he's the man who decodes and whispers to you the secrets of these great narratives that are constitutive of civilization or whatever. It seems like Dorst as Dorst as the author of this is basically pulling on those threads, the same threads. He's taking the myth that Campbell has whispered and saying, since that is true, here are the sort of touchstones that are worth uh, working from. This book is actually like weirdly specific about not referencing other actual authors, which I found odd. Um, it's not entirely true. There's like a couple of moments. Um, there's like a thread in the sort of first narrative between Jen and Eric where Jen is like having trouble, is about to graduate from undergrad, and she's having trouble sort of like finishing up her final papers because she's just gone through this bad breakup. Um, and there are real references to real literary figures in there, but as far as I can remember, that's the only place. And there was one thing that like I'm not gonna be able to find, but like um fucking yeah, I'm absolutely not gonna be able to find it. But there's like a moment where in I think it's an Eric foot marginalia note that says like I saw a Halls It truck, like HAULZ like space IT truck outside of your apartment. And it was just such a bizarre choice to invent a brand as far as I can tell. I like did some googling and there's the Halls It All company. They don't do like U-Haul style trucks. I feel like there are other brands just sort of casually name dropped in here, but I might be wrong. Uh, and maybe I fucking invented this because it feels so weird and like a fever dream to me that he would just like invent a U-Haul alternative and not just call it a moving truck. Like it feels like I'm missing something, but like I don't know why it's such a specific detail that's stuck in my head. But like I mean, part of it is because if you write a book where you're claiming that you're, the fucking like the fucking avatar of the 20th century or whatever, like I'm gonna be a little more picky about your word choice. But also just like why? Why would you invent a Halsey? Maybe it's real. Maybe I don't know. And that wasn't written in the voice of VM Straka, who's actually supposed to be. It's the written in the voice of the fucking teenagers or whatever. I mean, the like whatever 26-year-old who's hitting on a 20-year-old. Greatest love story of all time. Um, I'm spinning a little bit here, I think, but yeah, I I think I've made my point to the degree that I am capable of, and I think I'm happy with that. That um, the sense that I get is that um, this is not a text that like opens you up to other texts. It's supposed to be its own little fucking mystery box, and I think I could see like that criticism being levied at House of Leaves, but I think for me it was the exact opposite. House of Leaves made me help me like again in the most specific way possible. It helped me learn about Derrida, who I then went on to like read a bunch of, and who like really was formative in me becoming a better reader, and not just of texts, but of like my own life and other people and media and situations. I I think reading Derrida was like an incredibly formative thing for me, even though I was never a particularly great reader of him. I was an undergrad. I was doing a bunch of other things that were mostly non-social and um, smoking like a lot of weed. Um, but like I don't know. Maybe that's just a function of the potential fandom. Maybe people who were involved in that and trying to untangle those mysteries have found other things. But the text itself, the actual book Ship of Theseus, the actual book S by Abrams and Dorst, um, seems to me supremely insular. It's just very invested in its own puzzle box structure without much concern for the world. Which is frustrating. Again, generally is probably true. But very specifically because of the premise. Because VM Straka is, this mysterious figure who had to keep his anonymity because he had so many enemies. He had enemies in the CIA, in the KGB. He had enemies who accused him of fomenting strikes. He's explicitly talked about as a person who had like a hard leftist politics in the early 20th century. Significant portions of the book Ship of Theseus involve people who are at big moments or at places where big moments happen. Big moments like the murder of Archduke, or the assassination, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, those kind of big moments. Uh, Big moments like like, oh, I can't. If this book was fictionally written in the early 70s, it would have, Straka would have been at in Paris in May of '68. You know what I mean? That sort of thing. Um, they do not pay off on that even a little bit. It keeps coming up. Don't get me wrong. Um, because the sort of big thing here is you're reading this book and you're also reading Jen and Eric go back and forth, sort of like picking out who are all the people who like have been thought to be VM Straka, and they're trying to figure out who's the real VM Straka. So they learn all of these things about his life and all the things about these other people in who are thought to be possibly the actual Straka, sort of eliminating people or bringing them back in, etc., etc. It's a big, beautiful mystery. What that mystery never does is show any interest um, in these world historical moments other than as pieces of evidence to plot along a graph. And it's so ah bah like ah I I find this book incredibly frustrating. Okay. Um like I said, this book feels like a puzzle box in a way I find very gratifying to read, but not at all interesting in a sustainable way, in a way that makes me want to have this book around to reread even. Like I don't. I mean, I don't, that's just not where I'm at in my life anyway. But like, yeah, a thing that goes around in the fan community that I also saw a good amount was that there's apparently a interview with Abrams where he mentions that it's a novel about identity, not a novel about boats or like a ship tale. Um, there is a literal ship of Theseus in this book. Um, I don't think this book has a goddamn thing to say about identity. I think it it loftily gestures at the fact that it's about identity constantly. Um, what more inane setup could you have for a book about identity than our protagonist wakes up amnesiac? Now, now you're working with identity, right? Now it's because because the self doesn't recognize its own history. This must be about identity. It says the word identity a lot in it, and it's the whole premise. Again, like I said at the top, the Ship of Theseus is a question of if a thing has all of its parts replaced, each and every one of them. There's not a single thing of there's not a single element of the original that is remaining. Is it still the same thing? And there are that came out a lot more dismissive or condescending than I meant it to. Um, there are implications to that question, right? It's the kind of question that if you come down hard on either side of that question, you are doing so because there are assumptions that you operate under. That, for instance, like yes, if a thing can be completely replaced and remain self same, and you say, of course that's true, then you are working with different assumptions than somebody who says like, no, it can't. No, that wouldn't make any sense because it might be as simple as saying that to be recognized as the same thing is to be the same, right? It could be an interpolation argument where you just say, yes, of course. What matters is not the pieces that are made of; it's how another, especially an authority, recognizes that identity and interpolates it and forces it into a certain configuration. Whereas somebody who has, sort of an exclusively vulgar materialist understanding might say, no, of course you can't completely replace all of the components of a thing and have it still be the same thing because the components are the thing. The most like the teleological argument there would be like somebody who'd say, no, if you replace anything, it's actually not the same thing because each individual component is actually the most important part. And then you get into a whole joyous argument about like, well, when you eat, you are replacing elements of processing carbohydrates and starches and sugars, and so every time you digest something, you're actually an entirely different person. And frankly, that's a fun argument. I don't know that I would hold a philosophy to it, but like there is something there to it, right? There, you could pull that thread. Um, I don't think this book has. I don't think this book can say yes or no to the question of the Ship of Theseus. I don't think it knows. I think it. I don't think it knows, even though it does it very literally. There is a ship in this book. It gets replaced. All of its component pieces gets replaced. Every bit of it. Every last bit of it. And there is an argument made. There is a position not quite taken. For argument's sake, let's say. There's a position taken here. But it doesn't feel like one that could be continued to be interrogated. It feels like the position is simply present and it has no effects on any other possible position that the character takes, that the fictional author takes, or that the real author takes. There does not seem to me to be any way in which any position really that this book holds, could be put into constellation with any other position it holds to create something like a coherent understanding of what is important in the world, like an ethic, if you will, or even a sense of like a, I want to say an ontology, but that's probably not even like a I've lost the word. Got it. doesn't seem to be an epistemology here. There doesn't seem to be a sense of how knowledge works. There doesn't seem to be a sense of how politics works. There doesn't seem to be a sense of how, or no, not there's none. But there doesn't seem to be anything coherent about what we have here, except that it can be discovered through ciphers. Like, I don't know, is my like battery dying or something? Am I about this having no real sense of like of an ethic or an epistemology? Um, which is not to say that it doesn't have one. It's very different, right? Any everything does is like sort of the short version of it. It's impossible not to have some sort of ethic attached to your work. Um, it just does not feel like this book is in control of its own. Um, it feels like it's a book that's interested in creating ciphers and um, reading like a really competent mystery novel that is pretending to be like an important classic of world literature. Um, which is those are fine things. I mean, except for that last part is annoying, and frankly, ciphers are also fucking annoying. Like I don't, there's yeah, yeah. I think the ethic involved in things like ciphers is often quite shitty, actually. Um, but I'll leave it at there. I think because my computer is or my phone is not loving me talking anymore. And it's almost been an hour. Um, I think this might be my first one with an edit, which is fun. Um, I think I started these with the intention of trying to learn a little video editing. Is there anything else? Okay, Ship of Theseus, VM Straka. Um, frankly, in many ways, I think it would have been a better book without the marginalia, but I also would have probably not picked it up if not for that marginalia. So it is what it is. S by JJ Abrams and Doug Dorst. Um, I find it absolutely. And this is sort of going to spoil the structure of the book, I guess, or I guess you could count this as spoilers. So we'll just talk about this one last thing and then be done. So spoilers, I guess. Um, this is a love story. It's a really inane, multi-layered love story. It's like it's Jen and Eric getting together is the sort of the probably the primary thrust of the book is again this fucking like probably 26-year-old and this 20-year-old, um which is whatever, people can live their lives, I suppose. Doesn't mean I have to like it. And then embedded in that is their discovery of this love story between FX Caldera and VM Straka, um, which is so inane. Um, and they're discovering that through the text itself of Ship of Theseus, which despite appearing to be this uh, major political novel of the World War II era, is instead just really a love story about S and Salome or Sola. It collapses everything into it's the most bourgeois bullshit, bourgeois love story bullshit like imaginable, and it's like that's its ideology. That's the ethic it has. Like when a man loves a woman, he will go to the ends of the earth for her. That's like that's what this book is, and like fuck it, fuck that shit. What? Like this is the spoiler section. S spends most of his life like cruising around on this boat, pouring his like life into words in this underneath this deck, and then like sewing his mouth shut, and then going off on missions to assassinate agents of Voda. He's like literally murdering the secret police all over the world for decades. really, when you think about it, isn't it just like all about love? Isn't it just like about a man and a woman like meeting each other and just knowing how important they are to each other? And then, like, oh my god, it can be so hard. But at the end of the day, the heterosexuals. It's all about the heterosexuals. I liked this book, whatever. All right, thanks for not watching.